Natasha Winters pressed her face against the cold hospital window, watching the rain streak down the glass like tears she refused to shed. Her father lay unconscious in the bed behind her, machines beeping steadily, keeping him alive while she struggled to find a way to save him. The medical bills were mounting faster than she could count, and her small art studio barely brought in enough money to cover rent, let alone the experimental treatment that could give him a chance. Her phone buzzed with another message from the bank. Final notice. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. There had to be another way. There always was. She just needed to think harder, work longer, paint faster. But deep down she knew the truth. Time was running out. The billionaire's proposal. 3 days later, Natasha found herself sitting in the most expensive restaurant in the city, across from a man she had only seen in business magazines. Jonathan Blackwater was exactly as intimidating in person as she had imagined. His dark suit was perfectly tailored, his black hair swept back without a single strand out of place, and his steel gray eyes seemed to look right through her. "Miss Winters," he began, his voice smooth and controlled. "I understand your father needs immediate medical attention." Natasha shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "I don't understand how that concerns you, Mr. Blackwater. We've never met before today." Jonathan leaned back slightly, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "I make it my business to know things. Your father, Richard Winters, was a teacher for 30 years. He touched many lives, including some people who now work for my company. When they heard about his situation, they brought it to my attention. And you decided to help out of the goodness of your heart," Natasha said, unable to keep the skepticism out of her voice. A ghost of a smile crossed Jonathan's lips. "I don't do anything purely out of goodness, Miss Winters. I have a proposition for you." Natasha felt her stomach drop. She had heard enough stories about powerful men and their propositions to know this wouldn't be simple charity. "What kind of proposition?" Jonathan signaled the waiter for more wine before answering. "I need a wife." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Natasha blinked, sure she had misheard him. "Excuse me, wife," he repeated calmly, as if he were discussing the weather. "My board of directors has been pressuring me to settle down. They believe it would improve my public image and make me appear more stable to investors. I've decided they're right." Natasha stared at him in disbelief. "And you think I'm going to marry you for money? You don't even know." "Me? I know enough," Jonathan replied. "You're intelligent, well-educated, and desperate enough to consider an arrangement that would benefit us both. Pay for your father's treatment, all medical expenses, and provide you with a comfortable lifestyle. In return, you play the role of my devoted wife for 1 year. It's the impossible choice." Natasha felt the world spinning around her. This couldn't be real. People didn't actually propose marriage to strangers, especially not billionaires who could have anyone they wanted. This is insane. You could marry anyone. Models, actresses, socialites, who actually want this kind of life. Jonathan's expression remained unchanged. Those women want something real. Love, romance, a fairy tale ending. I can't give them that. What I'm offering you is honest, a business transaction. It's nothing more, nothing less."
But
"And what makes you think I don't want love and romance?" Natasha asked, her voice rising slightly. For the first time, something flickered in Jonathan's eyes. "'Cause right now, you want your father to live more than you want anything else in the world." The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. He was right. She would do anything to save her father, even marry a cold, calculating stranger who saw her as nothing more than a business asset. The contract 2 days later, Natasha sat in Jonathan's lawyer's office, staring at a contract that would change her life forever. The terms were clearly laid out in legal language that made her head spin, but the basics were simple enough. 1 year of marriage, public appearances as needed. Separate bedrooms, no real intimacy required. And in exchange, her father would receive the best medical care money could buy. "There's one more thing," Jonathan said as she reached for the pen. "My assistant Grace will help you adjust to your new lifestyle. New wardrobe, etiquette lessons, anything you need to fit into my world." Natasha looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of emotion. "And what if I can't fit into your world? What if I'm not good enough to play the part?" Jonathan's eyes met hers, and for just a moment, she thought she saw something softer there. You're stronger than you think, Natasha. You'll adapt. She signed her name with a hand that trembled only slightly. Richard Winters would live. That was all that mattered. The new life, Jonathan's penthouse, was exactly what Natasha had expected. Cold, modern, and completely devoid of personality. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the city, but the space felt more like a museum than a home. New bedroom was larger than her entire apartment had been. With a walk-in closet that Grace had already filled with designer clothes in her exact size. "How did you know my measurements?" Natasha asked as Grace showed her around. Grace smiled warmly. "Mr. Blackwater is very thorough in his planning. He noticed what you were wearing when you met and had his tailor estimate from there. Everything should fit perfectly." Natasha ran her fingers over a silk dress that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. "This doesn't feel real." "It will," Grace assured her. "Mr. Blackwater wants you to be comfortable here. This is your home now." But it didn't feel like home. It felt like an elegant prison, and Jonathan was her jailer. Their first public appearance together was at a charity gala for children's hospitals. Natasha wore a midnight blue gown that hugged her curves perfectly and made her feel like someone else entirely. Jonathan appeared. At her bedroom door, precisely at 7, looking devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice neutral as always. "Thank you," Natasha replied, though the compliment felt as empty as everything else about their arrangement. The gala was a whirlwind of introductions, small talk, and photographers. Jonathan kept his hand on her lower back, guiding her through, the crowd with practiced ease. To everyone watching, they looked like the perfect couple. Natasha smiled until her cheeks ached and answered questions about their whirlwind romance with responses she had rehearsed. But it was during their first dance that something unexpected happened. As Jonathan pulled her close and they moved together, to the soft music, Natasha felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with nerves. His hand was warm against her back, his cologne subtle but intoxicating. For just a moment, she forgot that this was all pretend. "You're doing well," Jonathan murmured near her ear. "Don't sound so surprised," she whispered back. And she was rewarded with what might have been the beginning of a real smile. The cracks in the facade back at the penthouse, the spell was broken as quickly as it had been cast. Jonathan immediately retreated to his study, leaving Natasha alone in the vast living room. She changed out of her gown and wandered the apartment, feeling more isolated than ever. She found herself in Jonathan's library, running her fingers along the spines of leather-bound books. Most were business-related, but there were others. Classic literature, poetry, even some art books that surprised her. She pulled out a volume of Pablo Neruda's poetry and found a bookmark tucked between the pages. Finding anything interesting? Natasha spun around to find Jonathan standing in the doorway, his tie loosened and his jacket gone. Without the formal attire, he looked younger, more human. "I didn't know you read poetry," she said, holding up the book. Jonathan's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "There are many things you don't know about me. That was the point, wasn't it?" Natasha challenged. "Keep everything simple and businesslike. No messy emotions or personal connections." Jonathan moved closer, and Natasha caught a glimpse of something raw in his eyes before he shuddered it away. "Personal connections complicate things. They make people vulnerable, and vulnerability is weakness in your world. Vulnerability is dangerous," he said quietly. "It gives people power over you, the power to hurt you." For the first time since meeting him, Natasha saw past the cold exterior to the man underneath. Someone had hurt Jonathan Blackwater deeply, and he had built walls so high that even he might not remember how to tear them down. The growing connection as weeks passed. Natasha began to notice small things about her husband that didn't fit the image he projected to the world. He woke up early every morning to exercise, but she sometimes heard him having nightmares that left him restless and withdrawn. He was obsessively organized, but there was one drawer in his desk that he kept locked. He received regular reports about her father's progress and always made sure she knew immediately when there was good news. Most surprisingly, he never tried to control her art. When she mentioned missing her studio, he had one created for her in the spare room, complete, with easels, canvases, and enough paint to last for months. "You didn't have to do this," she said when she discovered it. Jonathan shrugged as if it were nothing. The marriage contract didn't require you to give up who you are. But it was the night she found him in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, staring blankly at a cup of coffee that had long since gone. Cold that Natasha realized Jonathan Blackwater was far more complex than he wanted the world to know. And despite herself, she was beginning to care about the man behind the mask. Their contract marriage was supposed to be simple. 1 year of playing pretend in exchange for her father's life. But as Natasha watched Jonathan struggle with demons he refused to name, she wondered if they were both about to get far more than they had bargained for. The stage was set for a year that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, trust, and the courage it takes to let someone see your true self. 3 months into their arrangement, Natasha had settled into a routine that felt almost normal. She painted in the mornings, attended business functions with Jonathan in the evenings, and spent afternoons visiting her father, whose condition was steadily improving thanks to the experimental treatment. The doctors were optimistic, and for the first time in months, Natasha could breathe without the constant weight of fear pressing on her chest. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that she discovered something that changed everything. She had returned to the penthouse earlier than expected to find Jonathan sitting on the floor of his study, surrounded by scattered papers and photographs. His usually perfect composure was nowhere to be seen. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, and there was a vulnerability in his posture that made her heart clench. "Jonathan," she called softly from the doorway. He looked up. She saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Pain. Raw. Unguarded pain that he quickly tried to hide behind his usual mask. "I didn't hear you come in," he said, hastily gathering the papers, but Natasha had already seen enough. Photographs of children, medical reports, letters written in shaky handwriting. She stepped into the room and knelt beside him, her hand covering his before he could hide another photograph. "Who is she?" she asked gently, looking at the picture of a young girl with Jonathan's dark hair and gray eyes. Jonathan's hand stilled. Under hers, for a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he said, "My sister, Catherine." The hidden truth that night, Jonathan told Natasha the truth about his family. His parents had died in a car accident when he was 22, and Catherine was only 8. He had become her guardian, determined to give her everything she needed. But the pressure of building his business empire while raising a child had been overwhelming. "I thought I was doing everything right," he said, staring out at the city lights. "Private schools, the best tutors, anything money could buy. But I was always working, always traveling. I hired nannies and housekeepers, but I was never really there." Catherine had grown up feeling abandoned and unloved. When she turned 18, she had left without a word, cutting all contact with Jonathan. That had been 5 years ago, and despite hiring private investigators and following every lead, he had never found her. "The marriage, the public image, all of it," he continued. "It's because the board thinks I'm too unstable to run the company effectively. They've threatened a vote of no confidence. If I lose control of Blackwater Industries, I lose the resources I need to keep looking for Catherine." Natasha felt her heart break for the man sitting beside her. "Is that the only reason you need? To find her?" Jonathan turned to look at her, and she saw tears threatening in his eyes. "I need to tell her I'm sorry. I need her to know that not a day goes by that I don't regret the choices I made. She's the only family I have left, and I failed her completely." The growing bond from that night forward, everything between them changed. The walls Jonathan had built so carefully began to crumble. Natasha found herself falling for the man she discovered underneath. He was still driven, and sometimes cold, but now she understood why. Every ruthless business decision, every calculated move was motivated by love for a sister who might never forgive him. They began spending their evenings together, not as part of their public facade, but as two people genuinely enjoying each other's company. Jonathan would ask about her art, listening intently as she described her latest painting or shared stories about her father's recovery. In return, he opened up about his fears, his regrets, and his desperate hope that someday Catherine would give him a chance to make things right. One evening, as they sat together on the terrace watching the sunset, Jonathan surprised her by asking, "Do you think she'll ever forgive me?" Natasha considered the question carefully. "I think people are capable of forgiveness when they see genuine change. But more importantly, you need to forgive yourself." Jonathan looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. How do you do that? Forgive yourself for destroying the most important relationship in your life. By learning from it, Natasha said simply. By becoming the person you wish you had been then. The unexpected visitor 2 weeks later, their carefully constructed world was turned upside down. Natasha was in her studio when Grace knocked on the door, her usually composed demeanor shaken. Mrs. Blackwater, she said, there's someone here. To see Mr. Blackwater. A young woman named Catherine. Natasha's heart stopped. She found Jonathan in the living room, standing frozen as he stared at a woman who was unmistakably his sister. Catherine had the same dark hair and gray eyes, but where Jonathan's face was sharp and controlled, hers was soft and wary. Hello, Jonathan, Catherine said, her voice steady but distant. Catherine? Jonathan's voice was barely above a whisper. I can't believe you're here. I've been watching, Catherine said. Seeing you in the news with your new wife. I decided it was time we talked. The next hour was one of the most difficult Natasha had ever witnessed. Catherine confronted Jonathan about years of feeling abandoned, about birthdays and holidays, spent with hired caregivers while he built his empire. Jonathan listened without defending himself, accepting every accusation with a humility that Natasha had never seen from him. I know I failed you, he said finally. I know sorry isn't enough. But I never stopped loving you, and I never stopped looking for you. Catherine's composure cracked slightly. I needed my brother, not a provider, needed someone who cared. More about me than their next business deal. You're right, Jonathan said, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But I'm asking for a chance to be better. To be the brother you deserved from the beginning. The revelation that evening, after Catherine had agreed to stay for dinner and tentatively opened the door to rebuilding their relationship, Natasha found herself alone with Jonathan on the terrace. He looked exhausted but relieved, as if a weight he had carried for years had finally been lifted. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For helping me become someone worthy of forgiveness. Natasha felt her heart skip. Jonathan. He turned to face her fully, and she saw something new in his eyes, something that made her breath catch. These past months with you, he continued, they've changed me. You've changed me. I started this marriage as a business transaction, but somewhere along the way, it became real for me. Natasha's pulse raced. What are you saying? I'm saying I've fallen in love with my wife, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I know that wasn't part of our deal. I know you never signed up for this, but I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is anything less than complete and total love. The words hung between them like a bridge neither of them had expected to cross. Natasha's heart pounded as she realized that she had been falling too, slowly and surely, for the complicated, wounded, beautiful man standing before her. Everything seemed perfect until the morning Natasha found Jonathan collapsed in his study. She called for an ambulance, her hands shaking as she held his unconscious form. At the hospital, Dr. Phillips, a specialist Jonathan had apparently been seeing in secret, delivered news that shattered their newfound happiness. Mr. Blackwater has been battling a rare genetic condition for the past 2 years, the doctor explained. It's progressive, and without treatment, it's terminal. He's been undergoing experimental therapy, but the success rate is uncertain. Natasha felt the world spinning around her. How long have you known? She asked Jonathan when he regained consciousness. Since before I met you, he admitted, his voice weak but steady. The board doesn't know. If they found out their CEO was potentially dying, the company would collapse. The marriage was partly about securing my legacy, making sure Catherine would be taken care of if you died, Natasha finished, her voice breaking. Jonathan reached for her hand. I never meant for you to fall in love with me. I thought I could keep it purely business. But then you became the most important thing in my life, and I couldn't bear the thought of you watching me deteriorate. The choice the next weeks were a blur of medical consultations and difficult decisions. The experimental treatment required Jonathan to take a leave of absence from the company, potentially triggering the board revolt he had been trying to avoid. But Catherine, who had spent every day at the hospital since learning about her brother's condition, had an idea. Let me help, she said during one of their family meetings. I may have walked away from the business world, but I still have a degree in finance and 5 years of experience working for a nonprofit organization. I can be your temporary replacement. Jonathan shook his head. The board will never accept it, They barely tolerate me, and you're completely unknown to them. And we'll have to convince them, Natasha said firmly. We'll show them that Catherine isn't just your sister. She's a capable leader who can guide the company through this transition. The presentation 3 days later, the three of them stood before the Blackwater Industries board of directors. Catherine, dressed in one of Natasha's power suits and armed, with a presentation she had worked on nonstop, commanded the room with a confidence that reminded everyone present exactly whose sister she was. My brother built this company into what it is today, she said, her voice clear and strong. But he also taught me that true leadership isn't about being indispensable. It's about building something strong enough to survive without you. She outlined her plans for maintaining company stability during Jonathan's treatment, her strategies for key projects, and her vision for preserving the Blackwater legacy. When she finished, the room was silent. Finally, Judge Harrison, the longest-serving board member, spoke. Miss Blackwater, your brother has spent years keeping his personal life separate from business. Why should we trust you with our company? Catherine exchanged a look with Jonathan and Natasha. Because unlike my brother, I've learned that you can't build anything meaningful without the people you love. This company isn't just about profit margins and quarterly reports. It's about the thousands of employees who depend on it and the communities it serves. I won't let them down. The vote was unanimous. Catherine would serve as interim CEO while Jonathan underwent treatment. The real wedding 6 months later. As autumn painted the city in shades of gold and crimson, Natasha stood in the garden of the estate Jonathan had purchased for their family. Her father, now fully recovered and walking her down the aisle, squeezed her hand as they approached the small gathering of friends and family. This time, there were no cameras, no reporters, no business objectives. Just Jonathan, looking healthier than he had in months, thanks to the successful experimental treatment, and their loved ones who had become their chosen family. We've already done the legal part, Jonathan said when they reached the altar. Small smile playing at his lips. This time, we're doing the real part. Thomas Rivera, Natasha's best friend who had flown in from California to officiate, grinned as he began the ceremony. Dearly beloved, we're gathered here today to witness something remarkable. Two people who started as strangers became partners in a business arrangement, and somewhere along the way, found the kind of love that changes everything. When it came time for vows, Jonathan spoke first. Natasha, you came into my life when I thought I had everything figured out. You showed me that being vulnerable isn't weakness, it's courage. You taught me that love isn't about control or protection, it's about trust and partnership. I promise to spend every day I have left showing you how grateful I am that you chose to love me anyway. Natasha's voice was steady despite her tears. Jonathan, you offered me a deal to save my father's life, but you ended up saving mine too. You showed me that it's possible to be strong and gentle, successful and kind, powerful and humble. I promise to love you through every challenge, celebrate every victory, and build a life with you that's bigger than anything either of us could have imagined alone. The new beginning, the reception was held on the terrace where they had shared so many conversations, where Jonathan had first told her about Catherine, where he had confessed his love. As they danced their first dance as a truly married couple, Natasha marveled at how far they had both come. Any regrets? Jonathan murmured against her ear. Only one, she said, and he pulled back to look at her with concern. I wish I had fallen in love with you sooner. Jonathan's laugh was rich and warm. We had to go through everything we did to become the people who could love each other the way we do now. Near the edge of the dance floor, Catherine stood with Grace, both women watching. The couple with satisfied smiles. Think they'll make it? Grace asked Dot. Catherine chuckled. My brother spent years building walls to protect himself from getting hurt. Natasha didn't just break them down, she showed him how to build bridges instead. They're going to be just fine. Legacy 1 year later, Natasha stood in the boardroom of Blackwater Industries, watching as Jonathan and Catherine presented their joint proposal to expand the company's charitable foundation. Her latest painting, a portrait of her father teaching one of his students, hung on the wall behind them. A reminder that success wasn't just measured in profits, but in the lives touched along the way. The experimental treatment had been successful, and Jonathan's condition was in remission. Catherine had proven herself so capable as interim CEO that the board had voted to make her permanent co-CEO alongside her brother. The company was thriving under their joint leadership. "Mrs. Blackwater," Dr. Phillips said, approaching her after the meeting, "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For saving his life in a way that medicine never could," the doctor said simply. "When Jonathan first came to me, he was fighting his illness alone. He was angry, isolated, and honestly, I wasn't. Sure, he had the will to survive. But love, real love, it changes everything. It gives people a reason to fight." That evening, as Natasha and Jonathan walked through the penthouse that had become a real home, filled with her paintings and his books and photos of all the people they loved, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought them together. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't needed a wife, and I hadn't needed to save my father?" she asked. Jonathan considered this as he pulled her into his arms. "I think we would have found each other somehow. Maybe not as quickly, maybe not as dramatically, but I believe some connections are inevitable. Destiny," Natasha teased. "Chemistry," he corrected with a grin.
What?
"The kind that defies all logical explanation." As they stood together, looking out at the city lights that had witnessed their entire love story, Natasha realized that sometimes the best things in life came disguised as impossible situations. Sometimes you had to lose yourself completely to find out who you really were. And sometimes, just sometimes, a marriage that started as a business transaction could become the greatest love story ever written. Their contract had been for 1 year. Their love would last a lifetime. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter echoed through the sprawling garden of the Blackwater family estate. Natasha sat on a blanket under the old oak tree, watching as her 3-year-old daughter Emma chased butterflies with the same determined focus her father brought to board meetings. Jonathan emerged from the house carrying their 6-month-old son Michael, his face soft with the kind of contentment Natasha had never imagined possible when they first met. "Your sister is trying to catch every butterfly in the garden," he said, settling beside her on the blanket. "She gets that from you," Natasha replied, accepting Michael into her arms. "The need to accomplish the impossible, and the stubbornness to keep trying until she succeeds," Jonathan added with a grin. Their peaceful afternoon was interrupted by the arrival of Catherine and her husband David, a pediatric surgeon she had met during one of the Foundation's hospital visits. Their twin boys, now 4 years old, immediately joined Emma in her butterfly hunt, while Catherine collapsed dramatically. "Onto the blanket?" "I don't know how you managed 2 children," she said to Natasha. "These 2 wore me out just getting them from the car to the garden." "Wait until you have a 3rd, Natasha said with a mysterious smile. Catherine's eyes widened. "Are you?" "Not me," Natasha laughed, then looked meaningfully at Catherine. "But someone we know might want to share some news." It took Catherine a moment to understand, then her hands flew to her stomach. "How did you know?" "You've been avoiding wine at family dinners, and you have that same glow I had with both pregnancies," Natasha said. "Plus, David has been looking at you like you're made of glass." Jonathan looked between his wife and sister with amusement. "Is this some kind of supernatural pregnancy detection ability?" "It's called being observant," both women said in unison, then dissolved into laughter. The Foundation's success later? That evening, after the children had been put to bed and the extended family had gathered in the living room, Richard Winters stood to make an announcement. Now fully recovered and serving as the Foundation's Director of Education Programs, he had become the grandfather figure to all the children and the steady presence that anchored their growing family. "I have some news about the Foundation," he said, his voice strong and clear. "We've just received approval to expand into 3 more cities. The scholarship program for children of single parents has helped over 2,000 families access higher education. And our medical assistance program has covered treatment for nearly 500 families facing impossible medical bills." The room erupted in applause. What had started as Jonathan's way to honor his parents' memory had grown into something far beyond their original vision. Catherine's leadership had brought a warmth and personal touch to the Foundation's work that complemented Jonathan's strategic planning perfectly. "There's more," Richard continued. "The board has voted to establish a new program. We're calling it Second Chances, and it will specifically help people who have made mistakes in their past but are committed to rebuilding their lives." Jonathan felt Natasha's hand slip into his. They both knew this program was inspired by James Porter, the former employee who had confronted Jonathan at the gala years ago. Instead of simply dismissing him, Catherine had tracked him down after becoming co-CEO and offered him a chance to make amends. He now worked for the foundation, helping other people navigate financial crises with dignity and hope. The wedding anniversary on their 5th wedding anniversary. Jonathan surprised Natasha with a trip to the small coastal town where her father had grown up. They walked along the beach where Richard had played as a child, their hands intertwined as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Do you remember what you said to me on our first wedding night?" Jonathan asked. As they sat on a piece of driftwood, the waves lapping at their feet. "That you had the emotional depth of a calculator," Natasha replied with a laugh. "Before that, you said I had purchased the world's most reluctant bride." Natasha turned to look at him, curious about where this was going. "I remember. I've been thinking about that," Jonathan continued. "I thought I was purchasing a solution to my problems, a wife to satisfy the board, a respectable image to protect the company. But what I actually did was invest in the most profitable venture of my life." "Profitable?" Natasha raised an eyebrow. "I'm not sure I like being compared to a stock portfolio." Jonathan laughed, pulling her closer. "Not profitable in terms of money. Profitable in terms of happiness, love, family, meaning, everything that actually matters." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Natasha's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple band set with their birthstones and those of their children. "This isn't an engagement ring," he said softly. "We're already married, already committed. This is a promise ring. A promise that every day for the rest of our lives I choose you, not because of a contract or an arrangement, but because you are my heart, my home, my everything." Natasha felt tears streaming down her cheeks as Jonathan slipped the ring on too. "Her right hand, I choose you too," she whispered. "Every day in every way, forever." The unexpected visitor to their peaceful anniversary celebration was interrupted the next morning by a phone call from Grace, who had remained Jonathan's assistant, even as she had also become Catherine's closest friend and the children's honorary. "Aunt, I'm sorry to bother you," Grace said, "but there's someone here who insists on speaking with both of you. She says her name is Lisa Porter and she's James Porter's daughter." Jonathan and Natasha exchanged glances. They had kept in touch with James as he rebuilt his life through the foundation's programs, but they had never met his family. When they returned to the city that afternoon, they found a young woman in her early 20s waiting in the foundation offices. She had her father's eyes, but none of his bitterness. Instead, she radiated the kind of quiet strength that came from overcoming difficult circumstances. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwater," she said, standing as they entered. "Thank you for seeing me. I wanted to thank you for what you did for my father." "Your father did the work himself," Jonathan said gently. "We just provided the opportunity." Lisa shook her head. He gave him back his dignity. "When he was fired, he was so angry and bitter that he could barely function. Our family was falling apart. But the foundation didn't just offer him a job. They offered him a chance to help other people who were struggling the way we were." She paused, gathering her courage. "I'm graduating from law school next month, and I want to work for the foundation. I want to help establish the legal aid clinic my father suggested for families facing medical bankruptcies." Natasha felt her heart swell with pride, not just for Lisa's accomplishments, but for the ripple effects of compassion that continued to spread from their work. This was what real success looked like. It's not just financial prosperity, but the ability to transform pain into purpose, mistakes into meaning. The final reflection that night, as they tucked their children into bed in the nursery that had once been Jonathan's sterile home office, Natasha reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Okay." Emma insisted on hearing the story of how Mommy and Daddy met. A tale that had been simplified and romanticized for young ears, but never lost its essential truth. "Daddy needed someone to help him learn how to love," Natasha said, brushing Emma's dark hair away from her face. "And Mommy needed someone to help her learn how to be brave. And then you fell in love and lived happily ever after," Emma said. "Sleepily, we fell in love," Jonathan corrected gently, "and then we worked every day to build a happy life together. Love isn't just a feeling, sweetheart. It's a choice you make every day." After the children were asleep, Jonathan and Natasha stood in their bedroom, looking out at the city that had witnessed their entire love story. The penthouse had been transformed over the years, filled with family photos, children's artwork, and all the beautiful chaos of a home where love lived. Do you think we would have found each other if circumstances had been different? Natasha asked, the same question she had posed years ago. Jonathan considered this, as he always did. I think we needed to be broken in exactly the ways we were, to become the people who could love each other the way we do, he said finally. You needed to learn that you were worth fighting for, and needed to learn that vulnerability was strength, not weakness. And now? Now, Jonathan said, pulling her into his arms. We get to spend the rest of our lives showing our children, and everyone whose lives we touch, that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about choosing to see the perfect in someone imperfect, and loving them anyway. As they held each other in the quiet of their bedroom surrounded by the life they had built together, Natasha knew that their story had found its perfect ending. Not because everything was easy or perfect, but because they had learned that true love wasn't about the destination. It was about choosing every single day to walk the journey together. Their contract marriage had lasted exactly 1 year. Their real marriage would last forever. And in the morning, they would wake up and choose each other all over again, just as they had every day for the past 5 years, just as they would for all the years to come. The girl everyone had mocked for being trapped in a marriage with an arrogant millionaire had become not just his greatest strength, but the foundation upon which an entire legacy of love and service was built. And the broken, guarded man who thought he could purchase a solution to his problems had discovered that the most valuable things in life could never be bought, only given freely by a heart brave enough to love without conditions. In the end, they had both gotten exactly what they needed, even though it was nothing like what they thought they wanted. And that, perhaps, was the greatest love story of all.